thousands of people watched him that night. They watched him laugh. They watched him drink. They watched him joke around in a Santa hat, playing video games for 6 hours straight, completely at ease, completely relaxed, a man with nowhere to be and nothing to hide. They watched all of it live. Except it was not live. It had never been live. And 17 miles away, while his digital image laughed on their screens, a 32-year-old woman named Natalie was being murdered in her own home. She was 15 weeks pregnant. And the man thousands of people were watching, the man who appeared to be safely at home all evening, was her boyfriend. The father of her unborn child. Welcome to Secrets of Crime. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now, share this video with someone who needs to hear this story, and drop a like before we are done, because what you are about to hear is one of the most disturbing, most calculated, and most technologically sophisticated murder cases of the modern era. This is the story of Natalie. Not just how she died, but who she was, how fully she lived, and how the man she trusted spent weeks engineering a digital world designed to make him invisible, and to make her death disappear. Every true crime story carries a real person at its center. And before this story goes anywhere near the crime, before we talk about the planning, the deception, the forensics, or the verdict, you are going to know who Natalie was. Because she deserves that. She deserves to be remembered as a full human being, not as a detail in someone else's story. Natalie grew up in County Armagh, in Northern Ireland. She was the daughter of Noel and Bernadette. She was the only girl in a family of 4 children, 3 brothers named Brendan, Declan, and Neil. From the very beginning, she was surrounded by love. Her youngest brother Neil later said that because she was the only girl, the whole family treated her like a princess. They had a nickname for her that said everything about how they felt. They called her Nats. From early childhood, Natalie lived with type 1 diabetes. That is not a small thing. Managing that condition every single day, through school, through university, through work and relationships and all the ordinary and extraordinary business of living, requires a quiet, sustained kind of strength that most people never have to develop. And Natalie developed it. She managed her health every day without drama, without complaint, without asking for sympathy. Her family was protective, naturally, but Natalie was never fragile in spirit. Her brother Brendan described her as smart, strong, independent, and capable. He spoke about the way she noticed things, the way she connected with animals in a manner that said something deeper about who she was. She understood things that other people simply walked past. She was the kind of person who left an impression. The primary school she attended as a girl remembered her as kind, caring, and full of warmth, a smile for everyone who crossed her path. A community leader who had gone to school with her described her as a young woman with a bright future. And here is the thing about those tributes, they were not polite words spoken out of grief. They were not the kind of things people say simply because someone has died and it feels wrong to say anything else. They were consistent. They came from people who had known Natalie at completely different stages of her life, in completely different contexts, and every single one of them described the same person. That consistency tells you something true. Natalie had strong convictions. Her brother Neil described her as deeply passionate about equality, about the rights of women, about LGBTQ causes, about fairness in the world around her. She was bubbly and positive and deeply social. Neil called her the life and soul of the family. A people person. Someone who would drop everything to help anyone who needed her. A heart of gold, and he meant it not as a cliché but as a precise description. She had studied law at Queen's University. Later, she moved into communications and marketing, working for TransLink, Northern Ireland's public transport authority. She was active on social media through her professional role and had built a meaningful presence online. Her combination of legal training, communication instincts, and genuine warmth made her exactly the kind of person who thrived in that kind of work. She was good at it because she cared about it. Outside of work, she loved cats and dogs. She loved music. She loved the band The Killers with the kind of loyalty that real music fans understand. She had her own home at Silverwood Green in Legan. She had built an independent life, staying close to her family in Craigavon, seeing her friends, living fully in every direction at once. At 32 years old, she was not waiting for her life to begin. She was already deep inside it. She was exactly where she had worked to be. And in August of 2022, she matched with someone on Bumble. His name was Stephen. He was 36 years old, from a town called Lisburn, approximately 17 miles from Legan. He ran a YouTube channel that focused on video games, pop culture, Doctor Who, robot merchandise, and toys. He had built a real audience, around 37,000 subscribers, hundreds of videos, and more than 15 million total views across his channel's lifetime. He also worked part-time as a content editor at a major Belfast newspaper. That second detail matters more than it might appear at first. His professional work meant he did not just use digital platforms casually, he understood them. He understood how audiences behaved, how online content was consumed, how a public-facing persona was built and maintained and trusted. He understood the psychology of why people believe what they see on a screen. To the outside world, he came across as enthusiastic, quirky, and completely harmless. His first WhatsApp message to Natalie after they matched reportedly introduced himself as, and these are his words, that robot weirdo from Bumble. He leaned into the nerdy image as a form of charm. It worked. On August 7, 2022, he sent that first message. What followed was a 133-day relationship, documented through hundreds of WhatsApp messages exchanged between them. They went on dates. They talked about their pets, their work, their hobbies, what they wanted from the future. They spent nights at each other's homes. By October, Stephen had been introduced to Natalie's family. He referred to her unborn baby, before most people even knew about the pregnancy, as Little Squish. He spoke to her about moving in together. To the people around them, they looked like two people genuinely building something. To Natalie's family, Stephen seemed like another piece of good news. A partner. A father-to-be. Someone stepping into a shared future with their daughter. But evidence presented later at trial would describe a very different reality operating beneath that surface. A former partner of Stephen's testified in court that during their relationship he had been controlling, possessive, and menacing. She said he had hit her. She said he had secretly recorded their private counseling sessions without her knowledge. These were allegations Stephen disputed. But the jury heard them. And they painted a picture of a man capable of exercising a kind of hidden, calculated control that never revealed itself until the damage was done, a man who had learned, over years, how to keep two completely separate realities running at the same time. A public self and a private one. A performance and what was underneath it. By November 2022, Natalie was 15 weeks pregnant. She had a scan already booked. She had already thought through names, Dean if the baby was a boy, Zara if the baby was a girl. Her family knew and were full of excitement. This baby would have been the first grandchild. The first niece or nephew for her 3 brothers. Natalie was planning to share the gender news around Christmas, what should have been one of the most joyful announcements of her life, surrounded by the people who loved her most. December 2022 was supposed to be one of the happiest months of her life. She was approaching the end of her first trimester. She was in a relationship. She had her career, her home, her family, and her health. She had managed a serious medical condition every day since childhood and built an independent, full, meaningful life out of that strength. She was standing on the edge of a new chapter, about to step into it. What she did not know was that something had already shifted. Prosecutors would later argue that at some point Stephen had accessed Natalie's phone. He knew her passcode. They believe he had seen messages she had exchanged with a former partner. Their theory was that what he saw activated something in him, jealousy, possessiveness, a deep need to reassert control over something he felt was slipping away from him. Whatever the catalyst, the evidence showed that by the second week of December, Stephen had already begun to plan. Not react. Not spiral. Plan. On either December 14th or December 15th of 2022, Stephen sat down in front of a camera and recorded a 6-hour and 4-minute video. He wore a Santa hat. He drank. He played Grand Theft Auto and Robot Wars. He spoke directly into the camera as though he were addressing a live audience, making it clear, repeatedly, casually, that he was at home for the evening and was not going anywhere. He made a point of mentioning that he would not be responding to live chat because of technical problems. He also mentioned, in passing, that he would not be using his phone that night. Take a moment and think about those two statements. He explained in advance why there would be no live chat interaction. He explained in advance why his phone would be dark. Those two facts, no live chat replies, no phone activity, were the two things most likely to expose a fake stream for what it was. And he addressed both of them, casually, hours before anyone would ever need to ask the question. He was not improvising. He was solving problems before they existed. On December 16th and 17th, he told friends he was planning a live stream for the coming Sunday evening. He called it a surprise. He was generating anticipation, making sure people would plan to tune in. Making sure that on the night of December 18th, real human viewers would be present, watching, and able to confirm later that they had seen him online all evening. He was manufacturing witnesses before any crime had taken place. Sunday, December 18th. It was also the day of the FIFA World Cup final between Argentina and France, one of the most watched sporting events of the entire year. The world had somewhere to be that evening. People were gathered in front of screens everywhere. Natalie spent part of that afternoon at Stephen's home in Lisburn. While she was there, while they were in the same house together, investigators would later discover that Stephen had been searching transport timetables on his devices. Bus routes from Dunmurry toward Legan. Return routes back toward Lisburn for later that same night. He was planning the route while she was in the room. In the afternoon, Natalie left his house and drove to her parents' home in Craigavon to watch the World Cup final with her family. After the match, she returned to her own home at Silverwood Green in Legan. It was a normal Sunday. A family afternoon. A World Cup final. A woman going home. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Stephen posted an advertisement on YouTube for his supposed upcoming live stream. At 5:57 in the evening, he sent Natalie a WhatsApp message telling her he was going to be streaming for the night. She replied warmly, saying she might check in on the stream later. At 6 o'clock exactly, the pre-recorded video began playing on his channel. His phone went dark. At 6:36 in the evening, CCTV cameras near his home in Lisburn captured a figure leaving the area, carrying a bag. At around 7:36, Buzz CCTV recorded a man traveling from Dunmurry toward Legan. Hood pulled up over his head. Face covered. Black gloves on his hands, with a second pair of yellow gloves visible underneath. He was not dressed for a casual evening out. He had dressed to make himself unidentifiable. Every visible feature had been covered deliberately. The bus arrived in Legan. Street cameras across several roads tracked the figure moving in the direction of Silverwood Green. The prosecution's timeline placed him entering Natalie's home at 8:51 in the evening. At 8:24, 27 minutes before that entry, Natalie had opened YouTube on her device. She watched part of what she believed was her boyfriend's live stream. She saw him sitting at home, laughing, gaming, drinking his beer, wearing his Santa hat. He looked completely at ease. He looked like a man with nowhere to be and nothing to hide. She saw the man she loved, safely in Lisburn, 17 miles away. She had no reason to think anything was wrong. She closed the app. And while the digital version of him laughed on a screen, the real version of him was already in Legan. Already on her street. Already moving toward her front door. The prosecution stated that the attack lasted approximately 40 minutes. Natalie was beaten, strangled, and stabbed. A state pathologist later identified 48 separate points of injury across her body. She suffered stab wounds to the neck. Severe blows to the head. Compression of the neck consistent with strangulation. Prosecutors stated that either the stab wounds or the strangulation, taken individually, would have been sufficient to cause her death. She was 32 years old. She was 15 weeks pregnant. Her baby's name was going to be Dean. At 9:31 in the evening, the figure left her home. At 9:49, a man boarded a taxi near a bar in Legan. He was wearing different clothes from those he had been wearing earlier in the evening. The taxi traveled toward Lisburn and arrived at 11:12. CCTV footage captured the passenger throwing 2 items over a roadside hedge during the journey. At 11:16 in the evening, Stephen's phone came back to life. On his YouTube channel, the pre-recorded video continued to play, laughing, drinking, gaming, until 12:05 in the morning, when it was manually stopped by someone. Minutes after it stopped, Stephen sent Natalie a WhatsApp message. The following day, he sent more. Asking if she was okay. Saying he was worried. Saying he had not heard from her. On the evening of December 19th, Stephen arrived at Natalie's home at Silverwood Green and called emergency services. He presented himself as the devastated, disbelieving partner who had arrived at his girlfriend's house and found her body. Police arrived. He appeared overwhelmed. He appeared distraught. He told investigators he had been at home in Lisburn the entire previous evening, live streaming for his YouTube audience, and suggested that investigators might want to look at Natalie's former boyfriend. He was arrested on suspicion of murder that same night. But when police looked at the YouTube stream, thousands of viewers, 6 hours of footage, a public channel, a recognizable presenter, a timestamp that appeared legitimate, it seemed, on the surface, to confirm that he had been somewhere else entirely when Natalie was killed. On December 20th, at 7:34 in the morning, he was released from custody. On December 24th, Natalie's family were informed that Stephen was no longer considered a suspect in her murder. On Christmas Day, Stephen attended Natalie's wake at her parents' home in Craigavon. He was welcomed by the family as another devastated loved one. He sat among them. He grieved alongside them. According to reporting, he was given private time alone with her coffin. On January 26, 2023, he visited the family home again. When he left, he realized he had forgotten his phone. He returned approximately 40 minutes later to collect it. The phone, it later emerged, had been recording the entire time he was gone. Prosecutors would argue at trial that he had not forgotten his phone at all. They argued he had left it deliberately, to record the family's private conversations while he was absent. To find out what they were saying when he was not in the room. To measure, quietly and systematically, whether Natalie's family suspected him of killing their daughter. He sat across from the family of the woman he had murdered and listened to their private grief through a hidden recording device. On January 28, more than 1,000 people gathered in Legan for a public rally in Natalie's memory. Hundreds of people, standing together in the cold, holding a space for a woman they had loved or admired or simply recognized as someone who had deserved better. Stephen attended. Those present were reportedly told that a video tribute to Natalie had been made by her loving partner. What Stephen had not anticipated, or had badly, fatally underestimated, was the PSNI's dedicated cybercrime unit. Investigators began a systematic, detailed examination of his devices and his complete digital history. They did not approach the YouTube video as a piece of public content. They approached it as a piece of evidence. And what they found, working through the layers of metadata and file data and system logs, dismantled everything. The 6-hour and 4-minute video had not been broadcast live on December 18, 2022. It had been recorded approximately 4 days earlier, around December 14 or 15. It had been saved as a standard video file on his device. And in the early hours of December 19, after Natalie had already been murdered, and after Stephen had already made his way back to Lisburn, the file had been deleted from his device. Then deleted from the recycle bin. A digital forensic analyst testified at trial that the evidence demonstrated extensive, conclusive proof that the broadcast had been pre-recorded and later uploaded and streamed as though it were happening in real time. This was not a gap in the prosecution's case. It was not a theory or an inference. It was forensic fact, recovered directly from the devices themselves. The video had been created around December 14. It had been broadcast on December 18 from a saved file, not from a live capture. And it had been deleted in the early hours of December 19 after the killing was done. On February 1, 2023, police confronted Stephen directly with this evidence. His initial reaction was apparently one of disbelief. The video was still visible on YouTube, he told them. How could it not have been live? He seemed, in that moment, to genuinely believe that the continued existence of the video on the platform was somehow its own proof of legitimacy. Then, following that interview, he provided a new statement. He admitted that the gaming session had been pre-recorded. But he offered a new explanation. He said he had spent the evening of December 18 at home, drinking and sleeping. He said the real killer, whoever that was, had deliberately and carefully planted a trail of digital and physical evidence designed to look like him, to frame him for a crime he had not committed. On February 2, 2023, Stephen was formally charged with the murder of Natalie. Stephen's trial opened in February 2026 at Belfast Crown Court, before Mr. Justice Patrick Kenny. A jury of 6 men and 6 women heard 5 weeks of evidence presented by both sides. The prosecution described the murder as planned, calculated, and premeditated in every detail. Their case was built on a combination of interlocking evidence, CCTV footage from multiple locations, phone data showing precisely when his device went dark and when it came back to life, bus and taxi transport records, the forensic analysis of the fake live stream, his shifting and contradictory explanations over the weeks following the murder, and his sustained campaign to redirect investigators' suspicion toward Natalie's former partner. The defense argued that the entire prosecution case was circumstantial. They pointed to Natalie's former boyfriend, who had also been arrested during the investigation and who had admitted in some of his police statements to having been untruthful. The defense maintained that no direct physical evidence placed Stephen inside Natalie's home on the night of December 18. There was no eyewitness. There was no DNA match. The evidence, they argued, could point elsewhere. Stephen did not take the stand. The jury deliberated for just over 2 hours. On March 23, 2026, they returned their verdict. Unanimous. Guilty of murder. In the public gallery, Natalie's family and the supporters who had come to stand with them responded with cheers and with tears, the particular mixture of emotions that comes when justice finally arrives after a long, brutal wait. Her brothers stood up. Her parents were there. The family who had called her Nats and treated her like a princess and watched her build a full, independent, joyful life was there to hear it. Her brother Declan spoke after the verdict. He said that having Natalie in their lives had been the greatest joy their family would ever know. He said she would have been an amazing mother to baby Dean. And he said something broader, something meant not just for his sister but for every woman whose story has not yet been told, every family still sitting in uncertainty, waiting for a verdict that has not come. He said that violence against women and girls was a shame on society, and that his family's thoughts were with every other family still waiting for justice. Stephen received a mandatory life sentence for the murder of Natalie. As of the recording of this video, the minimum tariff, the number of years he must serve before he can even be considered for parole, had not yet been formally set. The prosecution requested a minimum of between 27 and 35 years. Crime Files America will update you as that hearing concludes. What made this case extraordinary from an investigative standpoint was not just what happened, it was how it was uncovered. The fake live stream alibi worked, initially, because it exploited something that is not a weakness unique to any individual, it is a structural feature of how online content is consumed by everyone. When we open a streaming platform and see a video marked as live, with a timestamp and a presenter we recognize, we do not question it. We do not ask whether the timestamp is authentic, whether the broadcast is genuinely happening in real time, whether the person we are watching is actually present in the moment we are watching them. We assume they are. We always assume they are. That assumption, deeply embedded in the psychology of digital audiences, is what Stephen was counting on. And it worked. Police, like ordinary viewers, had no immediate reason to question the validity of a public broadcast with thousands of apparent viewers. The alibi was not simply a lie told to investigators in a room. It was a public digital artifact with an apparent audience, a history, and a timestamp. It had the texture of reality. The PSNI's cyber crime unit dismantled it by refusing to accept that texture as proof. They treated the YouTube video not as a piece of content but as a crime scene, subject to the same forensic scrutiny as any physical location. They examined the file metadata. They looked at creation dates embedded in the video file itself. They analyzed deletion timestamps and the records left in system logs when a file is removed and then removed again from a recycle bin. They mapped the manner in which the broadcast had been delivered, whether it originated from a live capture or from a pre-saved file. Video files retain their creation data. That data does not disappear when a file is uploaded to a platform. Deleted files leave traces in system records even after they have been removed from visible storage. The forensic picture that emerged was coherent, datable, and unambiguous. The video had been created around December 14th. It had been broadcast on December 18th from a saved file. It had been deleted in the early hours of December 19th. And the device records showed exactly when those actions had been taken and in what sequence. This case also showed how powerfully CCTV evidence operates when it is layered with digital data rather than treated as a standalone record. The bus footage, the street cameras, the taxi records, these created a physical timeline showing a figure moving from Lisburn to Legan and back again. The phone data, when the device went dark, when it came back online, created a behavioral map running in parallel. And the digital forensics on the video file created what the prosecution's case described as a temporal anchor, a fixed point in time that destroyed the only real defense available, which was the claim that Stephen had been somewhere else. It was not traditional detective work that broke this alibi. It was a cyber unit willing to ask the question that the alibi had been specifically designed to prevent anyone from asking: was any of this actually live? The psychological picture that emerged across the trial, across the testimony of witnesses and the examination of Stephen's behavior before and after the murder, is one that deserves to be understood clearly. He operated, for years, with two completely parallel identities running simultaneously. Publicly, he was the cheerful, eccentric YouTube personality. Enthusiastic, harmless-seeming, nerdy, approachable. Someone audiences associated with robot toys and Doctor Who and Christmas gaming streams. That persona was not accidental and it was not incidental to what happened. It had been cultivated deliberately, across years, across thousands of hours of content. He had learned, through that process, something specific and dangerous, that a performing self, maintained consistently enough, can completely and convincingly obscure a private self. He had learned that people trust what they see on screens. Privately, the testimony painted a very different picture. The behavior described by his former partner, the secret recording of counseling sessions, the physical violence, the menacing possessiveness, describes a person for whom intimate relationships were not partnerships. They were territories. Things to be monitored. Things to be controlled. Things that required constant surveillance to maintain. The murder itself was not impulsive. That distinction matters. A great deal of intimate partner violence occurs in moments of explosive, unplanned rage, terrible and devastating, but rooted in a loss of control. What happened to Natalie was different. The planning involved, the pre-recorded video, the transport research conducted while she was in the same house, the disguise, the change of clothes, the planted recording device at her family's home, all of it speaks to a person who does not respond to perceived threat with explosion. He responded with strategy. The prosecution's theory was that seeing messages on Natalie's phone triggered a crisis in him, jealousy, a sense of losing control over someone he had come to regard as his. But the response to that crisis was not to confront her, not to leave, not to fall apart. It was to plan. It was to construct. It was to engineer, step by step, a situation in which he believed he could make what he had done disappear. His behavior after the murder reinforced this with terrible clarity. He did not run. He did not disappear. He did not put distance between himself and the people most likely to suspect him. He inserted himself, deliberately and repeatedly, into the center of the grief. He attended the wake. He sat with the family. He attended the public rally. He made a tribute video. He performed devastation to the people who were actually devastated. And even after conviction, at his sentencing hearing, the statements he made told the same story. He told a probation officer first that he was convinced he was not guilty. Then, after the speed of the jury's verdict, he said he had begun to think he might be responsible. Then he described himself as a monster. These are not the statements of a person developing genuine insight. They are the statements of a person who, even after the verdict, was still, reflexively, compulsively, managing how he was perceived. Still performing. Still constructing a version of himself for an audience. The probation service assessed him as presenting a high likelihood of further offending. That assessment reflects precisely what the evidence demonstrated. Not a man who made a terrible decision in a moment of crisis. A man who believed, until the moment the cyber forensics dismantled everything he had built, that he had successfully engineered an outcome he could control. There is a dimension to this case that extends beyond the crime itself, beyond the verdict, beyond even the grief of Natalie's family, and it speaks directly to the world we all live in now. Stephen's alibi was not clever in the way that word is sometimes used to describe criminal ingenuity. It was not complicated. He did not use advanced technology. He did not deploy deep fakes or AI-generated footage or any tool that was not already available to any ordinary person with a camera and a YouTube account. He exploited something that is not a flaw in any individual. It is a feature of how we all interact with online content. We trust it because we have been conditioned to trust it. The platform presents it as live. The presenter looks real. The timestamp appears authentic. And we accept all of that, automatically, without asking the question. Was this actually happening when I thought it was? That question, the question the PSNI's cyber unit eventually asked, is one that a jury had to see forensic evidence before they could definitively answer. That is how effective the assumption of digital presence has become. That is how thoroughly we have learned not to question what a screen tells us. This matters enormously right now. The tools available to anyone who wants to fake a digital presence, deep fakes, AI-generated video, pre-recorded content presented as live, are expanding rapidly. They are becoming more accessible. They are becoming more convincing. Stephen used the most basic possible version of this technique and it worked well enough to get him released from police custody and removed from the suspect list, to let him attend the wake of the woman he had killed, to let him sit in her family's home and listen to their grief. The more sophisticated versions of this technique have not yet been used in a serious criminal case in the way he used it. But they will be. And when they are, the investigative question that broke this case, was any of this actually live, was this performance actually happening, does this digital presence actually prove physical presence, will need to be asked faster, more routinely, and by investigators who are trained to treat a live stream the same way they treat any other piece of alleged evidence. As something that needs to be proven, not assumed. And then there is the detail at the center of all of this. The detail that is, in many ways, the most difficult thing about this entire case to hold in your mind. At 8:24 in the evening of December 18, 2022, Natalie opened YouTube. She navigated to her boyfriend's channel. She watched part of what she believed was his live stream. She saw his face. She heard his voice. She watched him in his familiar environment, laughing, relaxed, at home, safe in Lisburn, 17 miles away. She saw the man she trusted, and the man she trusted told her, without words, that everything was fine. She closed the app. She went about her evening, reassured. She did not know that the man on the screen had recorded that video 4 days earlier and had set it to play on a timer. She did not know that while she watched it, he was already in her town, already on her street, already moving toward her door. The technology she used every day, technology designed to connect people, to let them see each other across distances, to maintain relationships through screens, had been used by someone who knew exactly how it worked to deliver a message of false safety to one specific person. One performance. One audience of one. That moment, Natalie watching, feeling safe, closing the app, is the most disturbing single detail this channel has ever covered. Not because of the violence. But because of what it reveals about how completely the tools we trust can be turned against us by someone who understands them well enough and has decided that our trust is something to be weaponized. Natalie McNally was smart, independent, loving, and ready to become a mother. She was the daughter Noelle and Bernadette adored. She was the sister Brendan, Declan, and Neil called the life and soul of everything. She was the young woman who studied law and went to work in communications and loved her cats and her music and the Killers and building her independent life in Ligon. She was the woman her school remembered. The woman her community remembered. The woman who connected with animals in a way that said something true about who she was. She deserved the Christmas she was planning. The announcement she had been saving, the gender reveal, baby Dean or baby Zara, the news that would have lit up every face in the room. She deserved to stand in her parents' home on Christmas Day and give her family the greatest news of the year. She deserved to hold baby Dean. Stephen McCullough received a mandatory life sentence for her murder. The minimum tariff, the years he must serve before any consideration of parole, had not yet been set at the time of this recording. The prosecution requested between 27 and 35 years. Crime Files America will bring you that update as soon as it is confirmed. If this case moved you, if it made you stop and think, about the technology you trust every day, about the women in your life, about the weight of what justice means and how long it can take to arrive, please share this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear Natalie's story. Share it with someone who should know her name. Every view keeps her story alive. Every share keeps the conversation going. And every conversation keeps the pressure on to take violence against women seriously, to invest in the forensic tools that solve these cases, and to never let a killer write the final version of someone else's story. Hit that like button. Leave a comment below, tell us your thoughts on this case, on the digital evidence questions it raises, on what justice looks like for Natalie and her family. And subscribe to Secrets of Crime, so you are here for every story we tell. We will see you in the next one. Asterisk Secrets of Crime, every story matters. Every name deserves to be known, asterisk.